10 years ago, Sarah Miller held a knife to her own throat and told her parents you won't marry anyone but him. 10 years later, she picked up that knife again. But this time it was for me to apologize to her young man, Sarah Miller, who had vowed never betray in her youth. Now shielded the trembling young man in her arms, seeing me as a monster, completely devoid of her former love. In a daze, I remembered the young woman who had said she will always be good to me. I suddenly realized that our 10 years of marriage had truly reached its end. So for the first time, I proposed divorce. Sarah Miller, let's let each other go. I won't agree to a divorce. Sarah Miller rejected my request without hesitation. She slightly furrowed her brows, leaned closer to glance at Ethan, whom she was holding, then seemed to realize something. Slowly releasing him, but still protectively shielding him behind her, fearing I would hurt him. The knife held in Sarah Miller's hand, however, remained pointed at me, cold and menacing. She promised, "David, I can assure you, Ethan will absolutely not affect your position." After a pause, she continued, "But you must promise me you won't bother Ethan again." The trouble Sarah Miller spoke of was like the clear, embarrassing bruises on Ethan's face. Had Sarah Miller returned any later, I might have truly grabbed Ethan by the hair, slammed his head onto the coffee table, and used the broken glass pieces from the shattered glass on the floor to scar his face and hands, ensuring he could never appear before me again. A furious and vicious act. I had always been an emotionally stable person. For so many years, I rarely argued with anyone, let alone quarreled, and acting so recklessly, resorting to physical violence, was completely unprecedented. I glanced back at the two children hiding in the bedroom, but still stubbornly peeking through the crack in the door. My Leo and Mia, they had visible bruises on their faces. All thanks to Ethan. That's why I couldn't hold back. Sarah Miller was probably scared of me too. Ethan, whom she had pampered for over a year, was covering his swollen face and tearfully recounting my wicked deeds to her. And that young woman who had once promised she would never fail me in this life, was now filled with fury, ignoring the children's cries nearby. And when I tried to strike him again, she picked up the knife from the counter and held it to my neck, telling me to calm down. Yet, she had once used this same knife, held a knife to her own throat. But that was to tell her parents I won't marry anyone but him, allowing us to marry, have a pair of lovely children, and build a complete family. Alas, things had changed. David, we've been married for 10 years. Our ties are too deep. We'll die together. Do you understand? Sarah Miller's eyes were filled with determination when she said this. Completely oblivious to Ethan's resentful gaze, he wanted to take my place. Otherwise, this year-long affair, hidden meticulously by Sarah Miller, and with my absolute trust in her, should have remained undiscovered by me forever. That Ethan had actively sought me out, this young man whom Sarah Miller and I had jointly sponsoring underprivileged youth and put through school. He came knocking on our door brazenly, carrying photo after photo of intimate moments with Sarah Miller. "David, I am very grateful to you and Sarah for sponsoring my education. But mentorship and kindness is one thing, and it doesn't mean I have to return Sarah to you. I know you and Sarah have been married for many years, but you're older now, not exciting anymore. But I just turned 20, young and handsome. What do you have to compete with me? You probably can't do it many times a month, right? But do you know, when Sarah is with me, she tells me every night that she desires me. David, Sarah doesn't have that kind of desire for you anymore." Every single word pierced my heart. The day was the most broken I had ever been in my life. I couldn't bear to recall it. So I just looked at Sarah Miller in front of me and repeated my earlier words. "Sarah Miller, can we please just let each other go?" Now, outside the window, the cicadas chirped. In a trance, I remembered that summer when I was 16, equally muggy, with the same cicadas chirping. On that day, Sarah Miller, a transfer student, first came into my view under the teacher's introduction. Sunlight spilled down, and a gentle breeze lifted the hem of her clothes, her clean white dress unstained. It was love at first sight. As the class monitor, I had a duty to help the new student get familiar with the class, giving us a reason to interact. At the time, I only knew her name was Sarah Miller, that she came from the most prosperous New York City, and her family background must be quite good. Perhaps she was too rebellious, or had made some mistake to be sent to this small town. But none of that mattered to me. I only knew I should fulfill the teacher's request and help her integrate into the class as quickly as possible. Of course, I also had my own little motive. She was truly beautiful. I didn't consider myself a person of great depth, but I always paid more attention to pretty people. Perhaps it was fate. Sarah Miller and I were desk mates for 3 years. From the initial awkward student relationship, we gradually became close friends who could talk about anything. After a few occasional glances met, I felt my heart race, watched her ears slowly turn red, and a silent emotion grew in my chest. It was an unspoken understanding. After the college entrance exam, she held a bouquet of blue irises, my favorite, and asked if I dared to be her classmate for another 4 years. David had never been afraid of anything since he was a child. What was there to be afraid of in being classmates for another 4 years? So that summer, we applied to the same university and went to the same unfamiliar city. I thought I had found love. 4 years of college were peaceful and happy. We never let go of each other's hands until graduation day. A wealthy man dressed in pearls and jewels sought me out. He introduced himself as Sarah Miller's father, subtly looking down on me, and spoke of how vast the Miller family business was, requiring extreme caution in choosing a son-in-law. Marrying into the right social class was essential. An ordinary boy from a small town like me shouldn't try to change social strata by marrying into wealth. Dreaming of climbing the ladder in one leap, just like in the movies, a blank check was pushed towards me, generously offering me to fill in any number. But unlike in the movies, before I could even react, Sarah Miller, having heard the news, rushed over. The check I hadn't even clearly seen turned into a blizzard of paper, fluttering down before me. That day, Sarah Miller held my hand very tightly, as if still worried I might waver, repeatedly telling me, "David, the check isn't much money. As long as you don't let go of my hand, I'll give you whatever you want." At that moment, all I could think about was Sarah Miller. I don't want your money. I just want your complete and utter love. I was young and impulsive then, believing love was everything. The Sarah Miller was my everything. It wasn't until many years later that I realized how incredibly wrong I was. After that I only remember that smile. Sarah Miller argued with her father hysterically for my sake. Her face flushed red. In the end, she took a knife from the table used for cutting cake and held it to her own throat, leaving a clear, thin line of blood. She was resolute and firm. "I am not like Mother. I don't have so many schemes in this life. I only want to be with one David. Father, I hope you can grant me this." Perhaps Sarah Miller was too determined, or perhaps that splash of red was too jarring. But eventually, Mr. Robert Miller compromised. However, when he left that day, the look in his eyes held something I couldn't understand. But at the time, I didn't get it, simply dismissing it as every family has its own issues. My parents loved each other, but still couldn't escape their deep-seated tradition of favoring my younger sister over me. And Sarah Miller's parents had also been a harmonious and loving couple. But the Miller family had a tradition of sponsoring underprivileged youth. That young, timid, yet charming young man thus entered the Miller family's sight. Mrs. Susan Miller was tempted, having an affair, then another, and another. After tasting the sweetness of indulging in illicit love, she became unstoppable. More and more men appeared in her life. A life of decadence and luxury is always full of too many temptations. Mrs. Miller, in her high position, began to enjoy this extravagance and also grew distant from Mr. Robert Miller. Arguments, crying, threats, nothing worked. They fought year after year, until the affair partner from outside, with a not yet obvious pregnant belly, came to the door begging Mr. Robert Miller to give him a way out. Sarah Miller watched her father's tears, and looking at the seemingly pitiful, but actually hateful man, lashed out. The man tumbled down the steps, his blood staining their doorstep. Mrs. Miller was furious, and sent her away to study in a small town. And so began my acquaintance, understanding, and love with Sarah Miller. But ultimately, the maiden who slayed the dragon eventually became one. Sarah Miller, who hated affairs, also fell in love with Ethan, the underprivileged student she sponsored, even going as far as to lavishly spend on her young lover, buying a multi-million-dollar house for him. So it wasn't until many years later that I realized the look in her father's eyes, that a day wasn't born of emotion or compromise towards our love, but rather pity for the wild streak inherited in her genes. Like mother, like daughter, son, this was a cycle, a pattern. All along, he had been warning me not to repeat his mistakes. Alas, by the time I understood, it was almost expected. Sarah Miller did not agree to my request for divorce. We met when we were 16, started dating at 19, married at 25. At 26, we had our first child, and at 29, our second was born. By this year, at 36, we were already inseparable, emotionally and financially, so she didn't want to divorce me. With a husband and 2 children at home and a seemingly vulnerable affair partner outside, Sarah Miller wanted to maintain the status quo, not to mention, once divorced, the shares she had given me when she loved me most would be a significant blow to her. The Miller family was not without ambitious illegitimate children, and Sarah Miller wasn't the only heir, but abandoning everything and leaving with just the children was something I couldn't do either. What was mine, I intended to take. That's why we were at a stalemate, just like now. Sarah Miller again told me to calm down while she took Ethan and left. Ethan had several bloody scratches on his arm, one deep enough to expose bone, which I had inflicted with glass. Sarah Miller sighed and said, "David, just calm down at home. We can talk about things later." And then she took Ethan's hand and left. Even though he was injured, Ethan shot me a provocative smile before leaving. I was furious. I grabbed the ashtray from the counter and threw it. Ethan cried out. The ashtray hit him on the forehead. Sarah Miller hurried him outside the door. But the front door wasn't completely closed. I could hear the young man's muffled sobs, and Sarah Miller calling me crazy, pathetic, and lamentable. As soon as they were gone, Leo and Mia came out of the bedroom. The brother and sister held hands and cautiously approached me. I knelt on the floor. Leo and Mia opened their arms for a hug. "Don't cry, Dad. Leo and Mia will always be with you." 10-year-old Leo was sensible and steady, even with the bruises on his face. He managed to hold back tears to comfort me. Mia reached out and wiped away the tears from my eyes. Mia will always protect Dad and David forever. 7-year-old Mia had a bloody cut on her palm from the glass, but she didn't cry out in pain either, choosing to comfort me with her brother first. That man was really annoying. He stole Mom's key and came to our house to show off. Leo wrapped his arms around my neck and kissed my cheek. Today was a weekend, but I had some urgent work, so I had left the children with Uncle Mike's family. I never expected Ethan would use this opportunity to come to my house. Uncle Mike was washing fruit in the kitchen, and the 2 children were playing on the swings in the backyard. Ethan quietly walked over and told Leo to call him Dad. Leo had always been sensible from a young age, and vaguely understood the relationship between me and Ethan. So he ignored Ethan. Ethan got very angry and told Leo, "Your mom doesn't love your dad anymore. If you don't behave now, when your mom brings me home, I'll make her send you to a remote rural area to suffer the hardship I went through back then." Ethan was a young man from a remote mountain area. The year Sarah Miller and I got married, following the Miller family's tradition, we planned to sponsoring underprivileged youth who wanted to attend school but couldn't afford it. We didn't discriminate based on gender. There were both boys and girls. At that time, Ethan was only 9 years old, skinny as a rail, but his eyes were very bright. He proactively tugged at my sleeve and said, "David, I want to go to school. Please sponsor me. I'll repay you in the future." But I never imagined his idea of repayment was to get involved with my wife. The 19-year-old young man, full of youthful energy, kept appearing before Sarah Miller, insisting on repaying her kindness, stubborn and novel. Eventually, due to his naivety, he was drugged by someone. Sarah Miller happened to pass by. The drug was potent. The young man was delirious and charming, crying pitifully and adorably. She couldn't bear it. What followed were clothes scattered messily on the floor beside the bed. Sarah Miller's own hand drawing a line under our 11 years of married life, and Ethan's ambition didn't stop there, which is why he came to my house and said those things to my son. Leo was furious and shouted at him to get out. Ethan also became angry and fiercely pinched Leo's cheek. The young man's skin was tender. A hard pinch instantly left a purple mark. Mia saw her brother being bullied and rushed forward. A 7-year-old girl, of course, couldn't beat 20-year-old Ethan. With a hard shove, she hit the table. The glass on the table slid to the floor. Mia also fell, and when she used her hands to break her fall, there were broken glass pieces on the ground. Her palms instantly bled profusely. At the same moment, I had forgotten a file and returned home to get it, just in time to see the scene. No father could tolerate his children being bullied. So at that moment, anger surged through me. I took off my dress shoes and rushed forward, grabbing Ethan's head and slamming it against the wall. Again and again, it was incredibly satisfying that before I could return the favor and make him feel the pain of being cut by glass, Sarah Miller returned. Seeing me acting like a madman and her beloved young man being bullied, she ignored the loudly crying children beside her, grabbed the knife from the counter, and rushed towards me. In short, everything was completely different. You always thought I looked down on you when I didn't want you to be with Sarah Miller back then. But now, You should understand, shouldn't you? Mr. Robert Miller had entered at some point. Mrs. Susan Miller's actions had become increasingly absurd over the years. While Sarah Miller often said she felt sorry for her father, she was still her biological mother. Beyond looking down on her, she hadn't helped Mr. Robert Miller with anything, and Mr. Robert Miller had become increasingly exhausted by these matters, aging considerably in recent years. Sometimes I didn't know what he was holding on for. I had once asked him, and he said it was resentment. Resentment at having to hand over Mrs. Miller's position to the other woman. Resentment at suffering alone, so he wanted to drag Mrs. Miller into suffering with him. But Mrs. Miller had no heart. She wouldn't suffer. The suffering was always his alone. What was the point? I couldn't help but sigh and led the two children to his side. Mr. Robert Miller reached out and stroked Leo's head, his smile kind. But he didn't look at me. I knew he was afraid the Miller family's genes would produce another awful woman. But thankfully, you have these two children, and you and Sarah Miller have over 10 years of history together. From now on, as long as you stop thinking about love or not loving, life with the children will be quite comfortable. He sighed softly. Don't be stubborn, and don't think about making her change her mind. It's all in vain. To this, I shook my head without hesitation. Dad, I am not planning to persuade Sarah Miller. Mr. Robert Miller smiled and nodded. Then, my words cut him off directly. I am planning to divorce her. The children, hearing this, just squeezed my hand and remained silent. Are you crazy? Mr. Robert Miller was stunned. He leaned closer to look at Leo and Mia. The children are already this big. Just turn a blind eye, and life will pass. The family fortune will be your children's in the future. Why bother? Dad, I shook my head. I will take the portion of the assets that belongs to me and the children. But if you want me to suffer in silence for the sake of the entire family fortune for decades, I can't do that. Dad, you've been living like this for years. Are you truly happy? Sacrificing yourself just so that one day Mrs. Miller will grow old and your daughter can inherit the company, ensuring it doesn't benefit those illegitimate children outside. But when you see the daughter you love wholeheartedly gradually turn into someone as faithless as your wife, won't you be utterly despairing inside? I don't want my daughter in the future to grow into her mother's image. I also don't want to sacrifice the next few decades for the sake of the children, so I am absolutely going to divorce. I held Mr. Robert Miller's hand and said seriously, not only that, I also hope you can seriously consider not suffer in silence or sacrifice for anyone, but just to make yourself a little happier. So, Dad, you should get a divorce too. Mr. Robert Miller didn't agree to my suggestion, but he didn't refuse either. He just left with a solemn expression, as if deep in thought. I wasn't in a hurry either, whether he continued to struggle in this already rotten marriage, or brutally dug out the decayed part of his heart to embrace a different future. That was his choice. I just hadn't expected this choice to come so soon. A full week had passed since I proposed divorce to Sarah Miller, and she hadn't come home. Sometimes Leo and Mia would mention Mom, but not often. After all, the scene that day was so chaotic. The two children cried out, wanting their mother's embrace, but they only saw her go towards another unfamiliar young man. Even at their young age, that was enough to break their hearts. My next encounter with Sarah Miller was a week later at the family estate. At that time, Mrs. Susan Miller and Mr. Robert Miller, who lived at the family estate, had gotten into a physical altercation and drawn blood. Sarah Miller and I rushed to the family estate upon hearing the news. As soon as we arrived, we saw Mrs. Miller and Mr. Robert Miller sitting on opposite ends of the sofa, having their wounds bandaged by the family doctor. Not far away stood a young, handsome young man. I found him somewhat familiar. The next moment, the television played a commercial. The young actor in the commercial overlapped with the young man before me. Mr. Robert Miller's face darkened again. He picked up the remote and threw it at the television. Instantly, the commercial sound cut off. The young man stood trembling nearby, but the ambition in his eyes was undeniable. Mom, Dad, what are you fighting about again? This kind of argument had happened countless times over the years, only never before had blood been shed. Initially, Sarah Miller would plead for her father, but after too many times, a hint of pity, unnoticed by her, appeared in her eyes. Daughter, ask your mom if she has any regard for me. She let a little tramp come to the house to provoke me, even wanting to sleep in my bedroom and wear my pajamas. Doesn't she think she's worthy? Mr. Robert Miller's face was livid. He pointed at the young man, his fingers trembling slightly. The young man, not to be outdone, muttered, No wonder Ms. Miller doesn't want to come home. With your temper, no woman could stand it. Besides, I just wanted to act a little clingy with Ms. Miller. Who knew you'd come home so fast?" As he spoke, the young man even rolled his eyes. "I learned from someone nearby that Mr. Robert Miller was originally supposed to go out for a treatment today, but had suddenly returned home for some reason. He saw Mrs. Miller had brought this young actor home, and they were doing *that* in his room, even wearing his pajamas. In the past, no matter how much they argued, it was always outside, preserving at least some face. This time, she had brought him directly home. How could Mr. Robert Miller possibly tolerate this? So they ended up arguing, and it escalated to this state. "Mom, you're this old. How can you still do something like this?" Sarah Miller slightly furrowed her brows, feeling some dissatisfaction towards Mrs. Miller. After all, however, Mrs. Miller immediately raised an eyebrow and smiled upon hearing this. Then she leaned closer, looking at her daughter who resembled her so much, a hint of disdain flashing in her eyes. "If you had said these things to me before, I might have felt a bit embarrassed. But Sarah, you yourself have a young man by your side now. Didn't you cause a scene at home a few days ago? How can you have affairs? But your old mother can't. You can't even lead by example, so what right do you have to demand anything of others?" In an instant, Sarah Miller's face turned extremely ugly. Mr. Robert Miller was furious and wanted to hit Mrs. Miller again. Sarah Miller stepped forward to intervene, but was accidentally scratched on the back of her hand. Enough. Seeing the bloody scratch on the back of her hand, Sarah Miller pushed Mr. Robert Miller. "Stop it. It's just a man. If you really can't stand him, just send him away. What's the point of making a scene like mad people in front of so many people?" Hearing this, Mr. Robert Miller, who had just been enraged, his eyes became instantly filled with disbelief. He turned and stared blankly at his daughter. Perhaps he couldn't comprehend how the daughter, who had almost committed a crime for him, could turn into this. "Sarah Miller, your mom is having an affair and brought another man home to humiliate me. And he telling me to stop." Mr. Robert Miller's voice trembled as he said this, but it was still her own dad. Sarah Miller took a deep breath, then began to persuade him. "That's not what I meant. It's just, things are already like this. What's the point of arguing? Do you really want to make space for the affair partner outside?" Those words extinguished the light in Mr. Robert Miller's eyes. I watched this farce, watching Mr. Robert Miller, who was in the same situation as me, slowly walk towards him and take his hand. "Dad, do you remember what I told you before?" Mr. Robert Miller leaned closer and met my gaze. In that moment, I already knew his choice. This kind of drama had happened too many times, so afterward, Sarah Miller didn't take this matter seriously.